Centre for Policy Studies panel. Britain is a nation full of NIMBYs, people who say, not in my backyard. And then there are the notes, not over there either, and the bananas, build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. It's easy to see why when most new homes look like identikit boxes. But we need new homes, and lots of them. Soon, the average price of a house will be 10 times average earnings. So how can we persuade communities to accept more new homes without causing an earthquake in the shires? The Tories tried to take away the powers to object to local planning applications from local people, and that lost them the Amersham by-election and caused a revolt in the backbench. So now we are looking at street votes, under which homeowners can hold a referendum with their neighbours on design codes to vote about what is okay for your extension and mine, and possibly homes in between us. And then we can all benefit from the profit. So will that work? Will it be enough to sway the NIMBYs and the notes and the bananas? We have a cracking panel here today to answer this question. Next to me is the man from the government in charge of solving this, Lee Rowley, the new Undersecretary of State at the Department of Levelling Up, in charge of housing supply, home ownership, and housing strategy and planning reform. Lee used to be at the Department of Business as a junior minister and a government whip, and he is also the first Conservative MP in his seat of North East Derbyshire for over 80 years. Then we have Nicholas Boyd-Smith, who I'd say is probably the most politically influential thinker today on placemaking in England. Nicholas used to be a consultant for McKinsey, and he drove past a development site near his home and thought, who on earth would want to live there? And then he founded Create Streets, became chair of the government's Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission, and now heads up the Office of Place under the Department of Levelling Up. We also have Paul Brocklehurst, who is the chairman of the Land Promoters and Developers Foundation, which promotes land for new housing, anything from 30 to 10,000 new homes. Paul has considerable experience dealing with local government on new development, and he is passionate about the positive economics of sustainable development. And finally, we have Alex Morton, the Director of Strategy at the Institute of Economic Affairs, a free market think tank. Alex worked at Number 10's policy unit on housing and planning under David Cameron. He played a key role in Kemi Badenoch's leadership campaign, and he was also the former policy head here at CBS. I am Martina Lees, senior property writer at The Times. So our speakers will now each give a 3-minute introduction, and then we will take questions from the floor. First up is Paul Brocklehurst.
Thank you, Martina. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and on behalf of the LPDF, can I welcome you here this evening, and we're delighted to be sponsoring this discussion. It is our members that are generally responsible for establishing the principle of residential development on much of the greenfield and brownfield land throughout the country. As a consequence, they actively engage with communities in the hope that they are able to persuade them to accept new development. And I myself have over 20 years experience of trying to undertake exactly that activity. First, let me say that I'm not going to make any comment, Lee, about tax, but I have to say I think the fiscal event may have hit upon one key word that has been missing from a lot of debate recently, which is growth. And I think that can be important not just in an economic policy context, but in a planning policy context. So I think for over 4 decades now, our country has become inured to the thought of growth. It's sort of it's not normal anymore. And that is the same in many of our towns and villages across the country. They have not seen a lot of growth. And so I think that has created the housing emergency that this country now faces, and is also putting pressure on our ability to sustain the public services which communities actually expect. So public exhibitions are very rarely pleasant experiences for developers, and indeed they can be sometimes very hostile. And there are a number of common technical issues that are raised as to why development is inappropriate. These can be highways, flooding, ecology sometimes, maybe design as well, Nicholas, is raised. Sometimes this is perception rather than reality, but not always. But the most frequent thing that developers hear is the withering of local public services and concern about access to public services. So access to doctors, access to dentists, access to schools, bus services on occasion. These are all very important to the local communities. And what many of them have seen over the last 3 to 4 decades is a gentle withering away of those services in them. Now, I think the issue is those very same communities don't make the connection between growth of their villages and settlements and towns as well, to the provision and need to have a growing population to sustain these. So for instance, I know Department for Education at the moment are very concerned about some of the census trends in terms of primary schools, and whether many primary schools in local communities are actually sustainable. I myself am promoting a scheme at the moment in Dorset. There is a primary school and everybody thinks it's oversubscribed. It isn't actually oversubscribed with people from the community. They are actually getting students from 30 miles away, pupils from 30 miles away. And so we have this fear of growth now as an economy, and I think we need to overcome that. A few final words. I think I would just like to point out, I think, and everybody's aware of it, that a lot of the housing issues that we are experiencing are actually being experienced by the younger generation. And so we have this growing intergenerational unfairness that is developing. And if I say developing, it's probably also already fully formed. And I think at some point this needs to be addressed. This can be seen through affordable housing requirements, waiting lists, but also home ownership statistics, where home ownership is falling away in younger age groups in quite large percentage drops. So in conclusion, perhaps bravely, this government may have hit upon the key, which is if we cut through political rhetoric and change so that we have an economy which is focused on growth and growth in housing as well, then maybe we will start to address the issue of public service investment, which actually quite rightly is a major issue for our communities. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, then.
Thank you, Nicholas.
That's all right, I thought someone needed to.
Thank you, Paul. Lee Rowley.
Thank you, and thank you very much for inviting me today. If the exam question is how do we ask new communities to accept new homes, then let me tell you a quick story, if I may. I'm the minister here, but I'm, as Martina indicates, the member for North East Derbyshire, my home, where I grew up. And the last time until last year that North East Derbyshire had a local plan was in 2005. In 2008, they realised they weren't going to get a local plan very quickly, So they decided to disregard some of the settlement development limits rules that would normally be in a local plan, which meant people started seeing building outside of the village's boundaries. In 2011 to 2017, the local council at the time, not our party, the local council at the time, repeatedly tried to do something about local plans but didn't manage it. It ran into a ditch. And then over all of that time, little bits all across North East Derbyshire, which is 38% greenbelt and quite a significant amount of greenfield, started getting taken out and applications got put in. Some of them got through, some of them got rejected. They went to the planning inspector. The planning inspector said, well, you haven't got a local plan, so what can I do about this? And I think the Secretary of State even said to North East Derbyshire District Council at some point, you haven't got a local plan, I've got to let this through. In 2018, the Secretary of State wrote to North East Derbyshire and said, you are one of 15 councils that is so comprehensively failing on your local plan, and unless you do something, I'm going to do something for you. It was only due to a change in leadership in 2019 that meant in 2021 we finally got a local plan in after 16 years. There is 1,000 more houses being built in North East Derbyshire than otherwise would have been necessary. There is no action that is going to be taken on the major arterial route, which already was busy before all of these properties came and now is increasingly busy. And there was no way we knew how we were going to build a new primary school that we needed in the south part of the district. Now, I'm not using that as a particular example from my ministerial perspective, but why on earth wouldn't people be cynical or difficult or problematic in those kind of circumstances? So the question for me now, 2.5 weeks in as a minister, is what do you do about it? And so that's what I'm hoping you will tell me. I think the key thing is, and I'm here to listen as much to speak today, my emerging thoughts are 4 things. And some of you heard this at some of the other things that I talked about earlier. One, we have to be straight with people. We haven't built enough homes. We need to build more homes. We need to build them in the right place, but we need to start by being clear with people that we're going to need more homes. You can't increase the population in the way that we have and not expect to need more homes as a result. 2, we need to treat people like adults. Most people do the right thing most of the time. We should take that to the extent that it's needed within the planning system, which means that people will make the right decisions if we give them the opportunity to do so. 3, with rights come responsibilities. If rightly we are devolving the right to make decisions about development in a local area, we expect people to take the responsibility to do so seriously. And 4thly, as a government, and we're very early on in this government, and I can't talk about every aspect of planning policy at the moment because we're still working through it, unusually for a conference meet, but we have to try and find ways to align incentives. People recognise, I think, and I know, that more homes are needed. People understand that that means that there are difficult decisions underneath it. But if we can find ways to align incentives, then hopefully it will make it a little bit easier. And the one example I will point to before I finish is investment zones, which were announced a couple of weeks ago, and where the latest part of the detail has come out this morning. The local councils have been invited to apply from this morning until mid-October. And that is an attempt to say, you want to do something, we think it's a good idea that you do something, how do we make it happen together? It's complete optionality. People don't want to apply, they don't have to. People get to put forward the area which they want to do it in, and then we try and work with government to work out how we unblock that so we get the output that everybody or most people want quicker. So let's treat people as if they're adults, let's be honest with people, let's talk about rights and responsibilities, and let's try and align incentives where we can to get things moving.
Thank you, Lee. And then Nicholas Boy-Smith.
Thank you very much. Having set the precedent for clapping, I'm in big danger if I don't get a clap. But my key question is this water the first time it's been used? There's a definite look of being used before, so I'm not touching it. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a paradox in nearly every person in this country, and I don't think they're scared of growth, actually. I'm going to respectfully disagree. Almost everyone, a strong, consistent, in fact, growing majority of people, accept, that's not quite angled right, is it, accept the need for new houses in principle. They just don't accept the need for new houses in practice where I live. And until we unblock that, we will never end the political nightmare for politicians of all colours in all places of fixing this. So how do we block that? Why do people have this paradoxical perspective? I do feel that every time I move my head, I see skin. Well, I think we've read most of the surveys. We've done quite a few. I've run I was going to say dozens, it's probably hundreds now of workshops up and down the country. People fear a range of things. They fear the loss of local greenery. They certainly fear the impact on traffic or school places. They certainly feel, less I think that development will be ugly, but more that it won't be of here. When I was co-chairing the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission with the late Roger Scruton, one of the most consistent themes that we heard in the focus groups we ran up and down the country, with very different people, was that it wouldn't feel like it was of this bit of Wiltshire, or it wouldn't feel like it was this bit of Hackney. And oddly, although the language was sometimes very different, the point being made was very, very consistent. 2% of people trust developers to deliver a good new development, and 7% of people trust local planners. It's from a YouGov poll a couple of years ago, and there's other similar data points. Disbelieve that if you like, double it, triple it, quadruple it, quintuple it. We still have a fundamental problem that as a society, I don't think we've fallen out of love with growth. We all still love more stuff and more money. We've just fallen out of love with confidence with what development will mean for us. That did not used to be the case. That is not something, if you go back 100 years, 150 years, even 80, 90 years, that wasn't there. You start having some of the first embers of it in the response to urban development in the 1930s. When they pulled down John Nash's Regent Street in the 1920s and 30s, barely anyone lifts an eyebrow. We weren't scared of change, but we've become scared of change. So, ladies and gentlemen, the question then becomes, why? Why is new development something that tends to make, or something we perceive makes things less good? Now, that's perhaps a bigger conversation than we have time for here, but just a couple of quick thoughts. First of all, we, like actually almost every other country, have made a category error, and I'm going to get on to controversial area potentially here for a Conservative meeting. We made a category error about the motor car. Motor cars are jolly good for getting around in the country, and they give you a Bertie Wooster-style level of freedom. They're really bad ways of maximising liberty or well-being inside an urban framework. And the consequence, and we're doing loads of master plans and design codes up and down the country, if you demand that every house shall have 2 or 3 parking places, which may be the rational thing for people living there to want, given the amount of public transport, but if you're trying to put that into a village or a small extension to a local town, then suddenly it's very, very hard, and trust me, we've tried, to design something that feels as if it is off there. My pronouns went a bit wrong there. And then we've got the next smoking gun, which is all countries, by the way, regulate the built environment, and they always have. If you go back to the Upper Indus Valley and the evidence from sort of pre-Romans and Greeks, it is really clear there was some guiding force on the black pattern. So some sort of regulation of the built environment is almost at the irreducible core of what the state does. Because if Paul lives in house A, and I live in house B next to him and have a thatched roof, and it burns down, his house burns down as well. Now, he can use property rights and legal rights to come back at me 5 years later. He'd probably rather I just had a slate roof. Is that a fair...
It's a fair
So some degree of regulation and state interference tends to keep happening. Now, what we've done in this country is, since 1947, we have nationalised planning rights, but we're incredibly unclear about what you need to do to, and here's the interesting turn of phrase, to win those planning rights, to win planning permission, an interesting turn of phrase. In most of the world, and indeed in the UK historically, certainly in the towns, what you could build was regulated, and by the way, 18th and 19th century London was a regulated market, actually far more clearly regulated than the modern market, but as long as you fit those regulations, nothing could stop you. And that, by the way, is how most of the world, I am simplifying a little bit here, but this is true, how most of the world still regulates the built environment. The consequence of that is because when you have a regulatory system that is unclear, you get producer capture and you end up with a very concentrated market. Guess what? England has got one of the most concentrated building markets in the world. We have a much smaller proportion of the people that, certainly based on our focus groups, people consistently want to see building homes. Local builders, local self-build, custom. Self-build and custom build is, I think, it's off the scale small in this country. So we need to move from a nationalised planning right with an unclear regulatory ask to a simpler, more predictable expectation of what is doable locally, set by local people, not set nationally, so that people will have some confidence as to what that will mean consequentially. We were talking about this just before we started. I was running a meeting with council leaders not far from here, just literally a few days ago, the strength with which they are simultaneously supporting lots of new homes as long as it can feel it as it is from this bit of the country. It was really very striking. So that's the category change. I'm being looked at, I need to stop. So that will take a generation, by the way. No one government can deliver that. There are things we can do in the very short term which are about finding fast tracks to popular, consistent development. Street votes has been hinted at, using the local development order and neighbour development orders, moving from a Section 106 to CIL, so it's a clear betterment tax as opposed to a barrister-led bun fight, and above all, moving to using visual regulation as opposed to verbal regulation? Because as one of the top planning QCs said to me about a year ago, I love it when you get nice, vague talk in the planning policy about good contextual local design, because I know that I can do whatever the hell I like. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicholas. And then Alex Morton.
Hello, and I've been doing these for 12 years now, so this is exciting to be back talking about housing at another Tory party conference. And sadly, the core arguments that are being put forward on the platform are correct. And to some extent, we kind of know lots of the things, or those of us who are involved in housing policy know. So one, yes, design has to be a lot better. Two, infrastructure has to improve. Three, it would help if we didn't have a large cartel that controlled the land market, because we've rationed the supply of land so much that the only people who can get it are a small group of not very good house builders in most cases. On top of that, you then have the political problem that no one has touched, which is immigration. So in Kemi's campaign, we pointed out that you will persuade people to build more houses if they are persuaded that the houses that are being built are so that family life and home ownership in this country can continue, not because the government consistently hands out too many visas and refuses to get a grip on immigration. So all things are connected, and Lee's job is going to be a lot harder if this government does not get a grip on immigration, because why should people people are not prepared to lose lots of green fields in their area if it is a consequence of government failure of policy, which it's frankly been since 2010. So having said design, infrastructure, SMEs, like getting rid of the cartel, what do you need to do that? And the answer is quite simple. You need to remove most planning rules. You need to give control to local communities. So essentially, local planning should allocate sites. Local people should decide what the housing will look like, what the infrastructure that is going to be paid for by the infrastructure levy will be. This will basically cut out huge swathes of crap. People do not care about nutrient neutrality. They do care about the design. They do care about what infrastructure is going to be built, because they know in their community what's the one thing that they really care about, whether that's a GP surgery or a primary school. The problem is that the department, for Levelling Up, though it has many good officials within it, is far too captured by the planners and therefore loves the idea of more planning. Local communities think they can use planning as a shield to stop people building in their area. The large developers like planning because it means that they can effectively control the land market. Who has the pockets to put through massive, long, complicated, 1,000-page planning applications? Persimmon and Barrett. And that's not to say, by the way, everything that the large house builders build is terrible. There's a range, but in general, they make their money from land speculation. They do not make their money from building really nice houses. They make their money through controlling the flow of land and getting hold of the land through land promoters and having good relationships with people on the council. That means they can get the planning permission. So the easy bit is sort of saying, what do we need to do? We need to fix the infrastructure, we need to fix the design, we need to give more control, and we need to get a greater group of builders building other than the top 5. The question is how you do that, and I come back to local plans need to be massively streamlined. They should be 10 years, not 20. They should allocate sites, and then local people should, through a process similar to neighbourhood plans, go, I want the houses to look like this, and I want the infrastructure that's going to be paid for on the infrastructure levy, which is now going to be a fixed amount of money, is going to go towards my number one priority, why. And if Lee does that, he will find that the incentives are much more aligned and he'll get more from him. The only bit I'm just going with Nicholas, we can start a bun fight, because in general we get on very well, is the car stuff is a complete bloody red herring. Don't tell communities that they can build how many cars people can have. That's the local community can decide that once the site has been allocated. In many areas, if you don't build a house with 2 cars, everyone will just park on the other streets, and residents really, really hate it. So don't do any stupid anti-car stuff. Say the local plan is a 10-year plan, it allocates sites, local people will decide what the sites look like, the end. And that's how you will get more houses built in this country with the plan-led system.
So what are the main concerns that prevent people from accepting new homes? I think there's some of you differ on what that is.
I think we largely agreed.
I think you said it isn't growth. You said it's change, and I think the two are linked.
No, I agree. It's change to the place. I don't think people are scared of... what is growth? Growth is getting richer. I don't think people are scared of that. I think they are scared of change to their place, because for the last 70 or 80 years, objectively, change has often made places worse, across a multiple of things. And you can just see that in the polling. I see it in every focus group or every session I run. That's the instinctive response of most people.
It's also true. It's also why there is much less objection to building on brownfield sites because the change is positive. In many of those places, the site is semi-derelict or not really that valuable, so people like the change. Even if you're building Barratt homes, it's better than having a half-derelict factory there. But on greenfield sites, people are like, well, I'm losing this, so the compensation has to be higher. The thing you're changing from is something that I quite like, so you have to make it nicer in order for them to be at least prepared to accept what you are building.
So can I just, this brownfield issue, brownfield has always been the priority for planning policy for many, many years in this country. Hasn't changed, it shouldn't change going forward. The issue with brownfield is it always has viability issues.
Actually,
and as a consequence...
Paul, I fully agree, brownfield is like you should build first, and we can't just build on brownfield. My point was more that people's fear of change is related to...
Actually, I think
threshold for greenfield.
Can I change the? So I agree with you and I disagree with you. You're completely right that it has been and it's going to stay the case. Actually, I think the concept of brownfield is problematic because what we normally mean by brownfield, and I'm sure most of you inside the bubble of techno industry speak, but just in case a couple of you sensibly aren't, brownfield essentially means building. Actually, it means building in large ex-industrial or ex-retail or ex-car park sites. It tends to mean big lumps of land. Actually, what our towns used to do was grow organically plot by plot just all the time, because this would go up from 2 stories to 3 to 3 to 4. So if you think about how towns develop, they get a bit higher gradually as they go. We've turned that off because you need to put in a planning application essentially for everything. What we need to get back into is learning how towns densify, intensify, plot by plot, rather than need to have huge bun fights on these big ex-industrial sites with chemicals underneath, because we can't just rely on the big sites. We've got to work out how we can intensify the existing street framework with popular consent, because until you get that ain't going to happen.
I'm not sat here disagreeing with the concept.
No, I'm trying to move. I'm trying to move the debate on from brownfield versus greenfield to brownfield versus town.
I just make one point about brownfield is what it delivers sometimes for the community. One, it delivers a certain type of property generally, which is flats. Yeah, okay. And what we end up doing is we try to socially engineer people into living in flats when actually what they want to buy is a house.
No, in every...
And then in addition, because of the viability issues, we don't have the delivery of affordable housing.
People will accept living in flats if the place is good enough. There are two things that dominate where we live. A, the size of the house and where it is, and B, how close it is to where we need to be. So people are much more accepting of a flat if the place is great. Sorry.
I'd agree with Paul. We do have to build on greenfields, we do have to build houses. My point was that if we're doing that, we have to build better and well-designed stuff because people losing greenfields really hate it. So it has to be a higher quality of design.
Those are good points, but I want a question from the floor, please. Your hand was up first. Is there a microphone? Can you please say who you are, please?
Guy Opperman, used to be the pensions minister, presently a backbencher. So my suggestion is that I totally agree with Nicholas and Alex that what we're talking about is quality. Quality is not good enough. And yes, there is a room and space for volume house building. We all accept that. But the quality, if there is a way forward for Lee, which is what he's looking for today, is solutions, is the structure of land allocation is determined by government ultimately. And that structure can build upon the city deals, which allowed organisations like Legal & General, who have built 2 very significant developments in Birmingham, biggest private rental development in Manchester is by a pension fund. So you structure the deals to ensure that investment zones, city deals, whatever they look like going forward, have a significant proportion allocated to pension funds. Why? Because unlike the shit of Persimmon and Berkeley and people like that, they are not doing a 2-year flip. What they're doing is they're building for 40 years. And their quality is always better. Their planning is long-term and better. And they look mixed generation. And finally, speak to Richard Bacon, look at Almere, look at the self-build that he's doing there, and go to Hooigoink, which also is in Holland, where they do building amazingly.
Is there a question there?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, make sure pension funds are part of the future. At the moment, they're not enough.
So, in the front here, please.
Thank you. Ben Flatman from Building Design. I think in the leadership election, Liz Truss mentioned Bourneville as an example she'd like to sort of follow. Bourneville's actually resulted in incredibly strict design codes, which you could sort of describe as a form of regulation. I'm just wondering how that sits with the government's avowed intent to sort of deregulate, and whether in the rush to build an enterprise zones we were actually like to see a sort of increase in the volume of shit housing.
Lee?
Well, the investment zones documents came out this morning. We need to see who applies. And for any councillors in the room, I would encourage you to apply. It's totally optional, but we want people to do that. We know there'll be a range of different people who come forward, some which are perhaps halfway through the planning process or significantly through the planning process and want to speed up the last part of that. Others will be right near the beginning. So the reality on investment zones is we need to see who comes forward, who gets through the process, and then what we can do to speed it up. And ideas like Guy's, who I defer to on everything pensions, ideas like Guy's are a great example of where we can think in the round, hopefully over time, to try and ensure that the idea of trying underneath investment zones, which is to say, how do we get things through quicker, that we can look at what we can do in order to achieve that.
Can I make a defence of deregulation, or rather good regulation? Like the Bourneville, private regulation is totally different. Saying I'm going to build something that looks like this, that ideally is what a planning permission should be, and it should be something that the community then signs off. What we don't want is the planning system basically focuses on almost everything except the things that people really care about. So like I said, the best example of that is nutrient neutrality. Like, no one gives a crap really about that stuff. They might use it in planning. I mean, most people looking blankly. It's a bizarre rule brought in by Natural England that basically is kiboshing loads of development, and it's something that no one cares about compared to, say, quality. So we need to get away from the idea that, what we need is more regulation. What you need is control, and the control going to the local community, not having endless rules that tie everything up in red tape. I mean, the only people who can wade through it all are the Persimmons.
There's one, if I may, just quickly on the Bournevilles and the pension funds. There's one other important thing we haven't touched on, because I was cruelly stopped for talking already at twice my proper length, forgive me, which is tax. I realise this goes beyond the Minister's purview, but it's worth saying, I think. Because of the disconnect between income versus capital gains tax, a good tax advisor will tell any landowner, don't stay involved with this site as you develop it over the next 10 or 20 years, as was done in Bourneville, and as was done in many of the good developments over the last 200 years. Get out, otherwise you'll be hit by a heavy tax liability, which is then, quite rationally, therefore, what they do is auction it off to the house builders. So we've actually systemically set up a market where existing farmers or landowners are actually disincentivised for staying involved because it's just not a rational thing to do. That's a Treasury decision, but it would be lovely if that could change at some stage.
And, sorry, can I just... I think it's a fair question that Ben raises about design codes in relation to investment zones, when one of the big sells of investment zones is that they're going to completely deregulate planning. I think our members are, and Nicholas and I were having this conversation before, our members are frequently using design codes to establish the principle of development, residential development throughout the country. So there's nothing to be feared from them. And I think one of the things, and because I sense a mood in the room, one of the things I would say about that mood is, in making planning consent scarce, you play into the hands of the volume house builders, who are the people that have the cash resources to then operate within that planning market. What you need to do is actually create more planning consents of all sizes, so that small and medium-sized house builders can get involved, because it's those small and medium-sized house builders that differentiate their product by building with an emphasis on design and design quality. So I don't think there's anything to be feared.
All the alternatives you should have as a planning commission is a bizarre thing that isn't unlike anything else in the free market economy. It drives me mad that free markets blame the housing crisis. A planning commission is a one-way option where you get land, you get a massive value from the government, you give them nothing in return. It should clearly be a contract where you are contracted out to build as a specific developer, so that I can choose a good builder in my local community. So instead of Persimmon being able to flip it and people being able to pass it round as a pass the parcel where the value goes up and up, you have to build something within a certain amount of time, and I as a council are giving it, or the community are giving it to a specific developer. There will then be competition on who actually builds good quality development. Because if you build shit, people will not let you build in their area. The current system where you just have a planning permission as a general abstract principle that I can sell on, pass on, tinker with, is terrible because it means that there are no real penalties for being a terrible developer.
Alec, I'll just one very brief point, and I don't like entering into the conversation about volume and small and medium-sized house builders, because what we tend to do in conversations of this nature, we tend to actually start saying that everybody, it is identikit housing and that is actually naturally bad. No, millions of people in this country live happily in those identikit houses and bring up their families and create memories. So I think we need to be careful about demonising all housing, because housing isn't just about the four walls, it's about how people live their lives within it. But I accept the need for design.
But I think the point is, look, I mean, we've, the volume house builders are not bad guys, they're not trying to do bad things, but all markets are better. I mean, by the way, I think some of the stuff the volume house builders do is great. I really do. And we're working with one right now, and they're just taking our advice, so they must be good. And they're paying for a sturt. So, all markets are better when you have more competition, clearly, and we just don't have enough tail of small builders.
No, the competition does.
Can we have a question, please?
Yeah, hi. So my name's Donnelly Cupid. I'm a councillor from Basingstoke, and I just wanted to say, firstly, Alex, I agree 100% with everything you've said. I've been a councillor for 15 years. We've had massive growth in Basingstoke. And whilst Paul said the problems are that people don't understand that you don't get the GPs and you don't get the schools unless you have the growth, I'm afraid our experience is the opposite. We've had 1,400 built every year. We have no GPs, we have no surgeries, we have no dentists, we don't have anything. It's a load of rubbish. And I would just like to ask the panel, because I agree 100% with what Alex says, and I agree with design, is how do you break the cartel? Because it's clear that the houses of yesteryear that were built in Basingstoke, because we've had a myriad of houses built since the 60s, because we're a London overspill, they were beautiful, and they're not beautiful now, and we've had huge problems. How do you break the cartel? How do you make sure that we have SMEs that enter into the market? Firstly. Second question is the idea of a local plan being renegotiated every 10 years fills me with abject horror, Alex. It's death by 1,000 cuts. I've been 15 years a councillor. I can't bear it. We've already had a plan, and it's a nightmare, and it's just horrific, and it's time-consuming, and it's extremely expensive, and it's a farce. And then the third question, it's very important, is I want the government to punish the builders, the developers, if they don't build the houses within a 3-year period. I want councils to be able to charge council tax per house that they've been given to unlock that bloody land. When they don't bloody build, then we don't have a 5-year housing supply, then we end up having to pass everything because we've lost control. So that's what I would like the panel to discuss. Thank you.
Minister, would you like to respond?
Can I come back on as a councillor, to break the cartel, as you put it, this is what I would do. So you've got good powers right now. Thanks to the new National Planning Policy Framework from last year, you've got a strong encouragement to create a local design code, an area-based code. The problem that you've got in terms of comparing what's built now with what was built 1,500 years ago, and I agree with you, is that we don't have the value chain, the small suppliers, the local architects and artisans who can create stuff easily of the quality that was done 100 years ago. I say with great regret. I wish that were not true, but it is true. There are a few exceptions. So what you need to do, and we're working on a range of sites and places where councils essentially have asked exactly what you've just asked. You need to put in place a simple code. You're not going to get Edwardian-style housing, where you de-risk the types of development that you and your neighbours and your voters and the people who vote for the other guys prefer, and you can easily find out what it is. You do visual preference surveys. You make it incredibly easy to do what you decide, not me, locally that you want, and then you completely risk up for the other stuff. So that's what you can do. And then you start to create that value chain of developers and landowners. And above all, you think about how to help small landowners so they don't need to start doing big deals with developers to come in and work with them, and they can start getting a less risky approach to development. That's your way where you are right now.
So, my criticism of Nicholas's proposals, which I think there's a good idea there, is that the system is so strong and the inertia is so strong. Since 2010, there's been neighbourhood plans, local development orders, planning permission in principle, endless tinkering. Essentially, a local plan should be, I allocate sites. Then there is the sites are allocated, the local community picks the developer, and there's a number of homes, 400 homes. People will come forward with, this is my proposal, and the local community goes, we want that one. It's really quite simple. And as in lots of things in life, people overcomplicate it and say, oh, we need to change this. You need to give control over who decides what is built and what infrastructure they are going with it to the local community. And they'll pick, of, say, half a dozen developers who gets to do it, and that would fundamentally change the market dynamic. Because at the moment, who gets that land are the people who have the best links with the land speculators, the large developers with the deep pockets, and that is a fundamental problem. You just flip it so a local plan is a site allocation process, the local community then decides who gets to build, and then you, as you say, you put a contract in so they're contractually obliged to build that rather than being able to wriggle out or squirm out at a later date. It's quite simple, it just means that, but no one would like it. The system is geared towards lots of plans, because there's lots of planners who like planning, and lots of developers who are very powerful.
Yes. Minister.
So I'm loving the debate tonight. It's one of the more feisty of the fringes I've been to so far today, and it's hugely interesting, including for me as a new minister. I think what we've Alex and I worked very closely together on Kerry Bagnot's campaign a few months ago, so we've had some of these discussions previously, and it's good to be able to have these conversations. As a minister and as somebody representing the government, it would be incorrect of me not to acknowledge the fact that this is an extraordinarily sensitive area, and it needs to be approached with a great deal of sensitivity. And we have a series of things at the moment in terms of legislation which is going through the House of Commons, the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, some changes to regulation which are coming in, all of which we are going through at pace and at speed to try and work through how we work through those well in the coming months and years ahead. All of the things we talked about, in principle, we all want the same thing: a better house market, more functioning market, something which delivers the end outcome which we're all seeking. How to do that, I probably will need to be a bit more cautious than some of the conversation today, but I do accept the challenge of how we need to get there. And if you take one example about house building and the debate about volume house building versus other house building, I mean, that's obviously people have very strong views in this panel. If we need more homes, we need all house builders to contribute more homes to that. But equally, we need to look at what levers government have to try and encourage a greater diversity within the market. And one example, I went to Milton Keynes on Thursday for my first visit as a housing minister. Homes England have parcelled off a portion of their land which they are progressively selling off there for specific SME house builders, and it's helping to encourage people and encourage different parts of the market to stimulate themselves after a difficult 15 years since the global financial crisis. But the reality on all of this is all trade-offs. It is all about trying to weigh up and balance all of these different things. There will be unintended consequences on all of the things which we've talked about today, and the job of politics is to try and filter that over time. We've got an immediate job to do, but very interesting to hear about the wider suggestions for more fundamental reform.
Just quickly on the point that you raise. Just quickly on the points that you raise. I won't address all of them, but you talk about one point which I have always been amazed. First of all, plans are central to our planning system, and somehow we have to get them in place. There are so few local plans in place. That is one of the reasons we're not seeing housing delivery at the moment. However, it has always amazed me why the public sector, as in the National Health Service, primary care trusts, a variety of other people, do not interact with the plan-making process. Because actually, that is how, under the existing system, they get Section 106 contributions, set SIL, or so on and so forth. And it has always amazed me that that doesn't happen enough.
Okay. You had a question, sir, and then we'll go over there.
Good afternoon. John Akers. I've been in planning for 50 years and I live in a thatched house. I just wanted to pick... Sorry?
Thatched terraced house?
Yes, actually. I just want to pick up Lee's point. He made the point that North East Derbyshire has struggled to produce a local plan and that this was causing problems in terms of certainty in your community. I'm sorry to say, as a planner, you can repeat that story almost throughout the country. And the reason for that is because the local authorities don't feel confident, and that confidence means that the communities and the house builders don't feel confident. And that's been going back to the planning white paper in 2020, but well before that as well. So the very first thing we need a clear direction from government about the scale of housing that's needed. We secondly need a clear direction to local authorities to produce local plans as a duty, not as an option. And thirdly, we need to have a variety of sites in each local plan, and that doesn't require any new legislation at all, because government have done that before in the MPPF. And if we do that, we will have the variety of houses, we will have a mixture of new settlements, smaller sites, and village sites. And I think it was Liz Truss who said that she welcomed houses in rural communities. I live in a rural community that hasn't had a house for 10 years. I would like to see more houses because I chair a village hall committee and we don't get enough people along. So I just think that we need to have a broader view about what planning's all about and a variety of homes for the variety of needs.
Do you have a question, sir? Was there a question in there?
Question, do you agree with me?
I mean, if I may say one thing, given the political challenges over the last few years, and I suspect in years to come, doing things that can be done within existing statute or that are already underway through the Levelling Up Bill, I would certainly highly recommend and would agree very strongly. I wasn't clear in my answer earlier. There are mechanisms already that local councils don't use. There are mechanisms on street votes hopefully coming through the legislation. I'd certainly encourage whatever we do, and it's obviously the minister's side, not for me, whatever we do, don't throw out babies with bathwaters, because there are things that could get going literally in the... I mean, we're working with towns right now that are busy changing the mechanisms and the way development happens in their town by using existing mechanisms. So there are things that can be done. So that's not
the quickest thing you could do is that would improve quality and get to all these things is allocate more land for self and custom build. So you could, in most other countries, councils allocate land for small and medium-sized builders who then, you get a plot of land with connection to utility and you build something, and you can kind of go to places in Germany and America where you kind of go, I want that one, and a small builder comes along and plonks it in the ground for you. That would be the quickest thing that Lee can do. It's probably also very necessary because if the economy is about to take a bit of a hit, the large house builders will stop building, many of them, and therefore land will stop flowing through the system. So maybe some of that land could go to self and custom build, because there are waiting lists of people that councils are meant to maintain, but they don't. So get that land.
Yes. Can I comment on that? I want to build my own house. Right now, my young family and I live in a tiny little bungalow which has no insulation. We have duct tape on windows as draft proofing. It's got one bedroom. I'm trying to build an eco house. We have spent nearly £30,000 on planning. It's been 5 applications, a year and a half of living in a glorified shed, and I still don't have planning permission. And I know how things work. So how much harder is it for people who don't? So that needs to change.
But I'm afraid, so I agree with both of those very passionately. Allocating it for development, I'm afraid, is not enough. Because you still, if you're particularly, as you know, clearly, if you're a self-builder, you've still got, the figure I normally quote is at least £20,000 before you get planning permission, and sometimes it's more. So actually, at the moment, given the current situation, I think the role for local councils or for neighbourhood forums or for parishes is to go beyond that and design a series of house types linked to NDOs or LDOs. So you literally, as long as you're happy to build what comes along, and you may not be, you've got no pre-building costs. You can go straight to it.
The point would be that's in a recession, if there is a need to stimulate construction, that would be quite a cheap way, helping those people. And people who are self and custom building, because they can live in it for 20 years, won't care that house prices are going to go down 10%, 20% in the next 2 years. Whereas the big builders will. So giving those land to those people will keep things building in what is almost certainly going to be a reasonable recession.
So all I would say on self and custom builders, the Bacon review was done. It was an excellent report. I can't believe it's not been implemented yet.
We had a question over there.
Thank you very much. Sam Bruce at the Centre for Social Justice. One of the issues that's been touched on briefly was the lack of affordable housing. It's often not built to the extent that is intended at the beginning of developments, and we're lacking that massively as a country. Only 6,000 homes were built for social rent in the last year, where statistics are available. What more can we do to unlock social and affordable housing developments so that communities believe that people who are living locally, their children, and key workers will be able to live in their area? Thank you.
Any comments?
Well, there's a substantial amount of work, as I know you will know, Sam, already underway across government on this. We have a number of programmes around that. Obviously, there's a substantial amount which is allocated within plans. So there is obviously a balance to be struck here. It's a difficult one. The primacy here goes to localities to make a determination of what they can achieve through the system as it currently stands. And then there is obviously a number of different funds around the place which we try and help in order to make sure there is increased delivery. As with everything in planning, we need to look at it all in due course to see what we can do. Affordable housing programme is one of the earliest things that I'm looking at, but we acknowledge the challenge. The question again, back to this trade-offs point, back to this working through how we do it, is how best do you make sure you achieve both the macro objectives and take as many of the other objectives with you at the same time.
A small tweak you could do if you actually want to align incentives is make affordable housing should go to people in the ward or village or parish where the houses are being built, because at the moment quite often in rural areas you're like, we're getting houses built, but the people who will live in them aren't my kids, aren't my friends' kids, they aren't anyone knows kids. They're basically going to be like from the nearby town, etc. There is a massive incentive misalignment around affordable homes where, like Wiltshire is a unitary authority. The idea that you will agree to, say, 500 homes because someone at the other end of Wiltshire is getting an affordable house is nonsense. Like, if you want to make communities buy into it, you do need to be like, your children will at least be at the front of the queue. Now, if there are houses spare, obviously other people should be allowed in. You shouldn't, that they shouldn't be market homes, but you do have to say the people who live near the development who are getting the extra infrastructure pressures, at least you as a community are getting the first dibs on them. There's a quick incentive alignment change.
Over there.
Thank you. David Evans, District Councillor. Can you hear me now? Sorry about that. District Councillor, East Hampshire. I like what Nicholas Boyd-Smith was saying about the 1947 Act. We've really got to sweep it away. Your diagram here shows what it was doing, and it was destroying private house building from 1947. It would have virtually wiped it out. So let's get rid of the 1947 Act. I would very much like to hear to have written down Mr. Morton's scheme, because I think that's a brilliant one, because it takes 7 years now to write at least a local plan, because we're writing another one, and you have to renew them every 5 years. It's bonkers, isn't it? Here's an idea for you then. SIL provides money for infrastructure, which is great. We've got 800 homes coming, so that will take 10 years to develop, and it still trickles in. So people are right to be very suspicious about whether they will get their infrastructure, because quite often they don't. So could the government pre-fund the necessary infrastructure that SIL will pay for over the next 10 years so that it can be built up front, and the people who have the houses have the infrastructure when they move in, not in 10 years' time when the whole scheme's built out? Because that's one of the things people really don't believe, and that's one of the real reasons they don't want houses, because they don't believe the infrastructure will come. And unfortunately, quite often they're correct. Thank you.
Excellent point. Lee, would you like to respond?
Well, I'm afraid there are just some things 2.5 weeks into the job that I can't respond to, but I have written it down. I will go and consider it, and I'll go and talk to officials about it. I can't give any guarantees today, and I wouldn't read anything in or out of that. Simply that part of my job at the moment is to listen as well as to speak, and I hope I've shown, at least during part of this very interesting debate, that I've been listening as well.
I mean, one thing that I think does make it hard to do this is because we rely largely... Sorry, I apologise. It's my colleague's fault.
Yeah,
He stole it.
yes.
He's a nasty, evil, selfish man. Because we rely largely on Section 106 agreements, which are, as you know, complex negotiation, and I advise anyone try not to get involved with one for your own sanity, rather than a straight betterment tax. It is quite normal and right, in my view, to tax development, which makes a lot of money for everyone involved normally. But taxes basically should just be a tax. You pay X%. Now, there's some quite complex issues, which let's not get into now, about when you charge it and what you charge it on. So there are technically difficult things there, but I think the direction of travel in national policy of moving from Section 106 towards a more SIL-like thing, then you get into a phasing issue. It must be right. So you just know you're going to make X and you're going to pay Y%. It's a tax, quite right.
There is community infrastructure levy.
Yeah, but it's barely used.
It is barely used. I don't know why. And as you say, well...
He agrees with me.
You had a question a long time ago, and then I'll go over there at the back. So...
Thank you. My name's Joel Cohen. I'm from the Royal Town Planning Institute, and I wanted to ask, as you might expect if there's in some ways a bit of an elephant in the room, in that whatever we decide politically is justified as a way to set up the rules and the incentives that go along with the planning system. Public sector planning departments, whatever that policy is, will still be expected to deliver it on a thinner and thinner margin, in the sense that the resourcing for planning departments has been cut and cut and cut. And I know lots of developers, whatever the outcome, would very much like to see planners getting back to them as soon as they can, and house builders, as we heard from our chair, would like to hear back from their planning departments very, very quickly. But 43% of public sector planning departments across the country on average have been cut, their expenditure has been cut by about 43%. How we can keep on doing more, getting more incentives, and getting more strategy, and getting better things for communities out of planning teams on that level of decline is impossible.
We have 5 minutes left, so quick response.
So just very briefly, I'd already written down resources at local planning authorities. We've given discussion points about design codes, street votes, build more houses, get plans in place. Effectively, we need more people. We need to resource the local planning teams, but also we need to resource the statutory consultees as well. The Highways Agency, the Environment Agency, and all of the statutory consultees.
Nicholas?
So I quite agree that we don't have the resources we require for the current system. It'd be lovely to have more resources for the current system. The problem is we have a ridiculous system where we're putting far more focus on development control and far less focus on strategic planning, or if you like, setting the regulations. You can have a bun fight forever about a planning policy decision. We're treating everything as if it's a Rolls-Royce unique, difficult planning application procedurally. And that's right for some things. Some things are complex and difficult, might be complex heritage or complex infrastructure. But we need to work out, and I think there are ways now to do that, how to treat good normal housing and good normal development like good normal housing, where essentially you can take it off the shelf locally, because that has to be the right way to do it. So we need to strategically. The problem with that is that different skill sets are required for development control officers versus strategic planners, and that, I think, is the challenge.
The big a key point there is planning tries to do too much. I remember reading. I read Planning magazine occasionally and enjoy it at times, but there was something. It was a piece sort of saying, "Oh, anti-obesity must be a real challenge. Sustainability is what's planning all about. Everything is what bloody planning is all about. Planning is literally about making sure we build enough houses that there isn't a housing crisis, something we've been quite bad at doing. Local plans need to be short, streamlined documents that decide on sites, and then the community can take over from there and decide which the developers get to build and what exactly they get to build, because otherwise you end up what everyone has, which is very long planning documents, very long planning applications, and everyone's saying what we need is even more resources, which just get poured into, like I said, you just end up with a weird sort of swallowing its tail, where the local plans have got longer and longer and take longer and longer, and planning applications have got longer and longer, yet we are still not getting what people actually want out of the system.
Thank you, Alex. I think that is almost all we have time today. I just had a very quick question for the Minister. How far are we off actually getting street votes?
Well, street votes is in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill. That's halfway through committee at the moment. Committee will go back in a few weeks' time, and we're committed to delivering it. So as soon as
when
possible.
can I vote?
Well, as soon as we're able to. There you go. That's a politician's answer for you.
Right. Well, I'll conclude with one example of how one community was persuaded to accept new homes. Barton Quarter, on the side of a former bus depot in Nottingham, had lain empty for 25 years, and yet 250 new homes got approved without a single objection. The application was by the Prince of Wales, now our king, but the key was that the NIMBYs got to help design it. They had mood boards and they got stuck dots on it on the designs they like best. So there you go. On that note, thank you very much to all our speakers, and thank you for listening. Please take a selfie with Maggie and tweet about this. So, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.